Great, good afternoon. We are delighted to be joined today by Henrietta Fore, the Executive Director of Unicef, as well as with Mark Lowcock, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, and they are here to brief you on their recent visit to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Ms. Fore, please.
Thank you very much. Undersecretary Lowcock and I visited Kinshasa, Goma, Beni, Bunia, and Butembo in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And my first reaction, and I believe Mark's also, is the situation for children is quite dire. DRC has been plagued by conflicts, a proliferation of armed groups, of disease outbreaks, of natural disasters, and sexual violence. And I believe that you know the numbers, but let me just give you a few. 13 million people, including 7.5 million children, are in need of humanitarian assistance. 7,000 cases of measles and 3,500 cases of cholera were reported in January alone. 3 in 10 women are reported as victims of sexual violence. When we were in Goma, we visited a clinic in which we met with one young girl who's 13, who'd been abused by her stepfather, became pregnant, had just had her baby 4 days earlier, and was trying to go back to school. So it's a difficult life with sexual violence, but it is very important that these communities not stigmatize and allow girls to return to school. There are 2 million newly displaced persons last year. In Bunia, we visited a displaced persons camp that were hosting families that had fled the inter-regional conflict in Jugu. And at this IDP camp, we visited a child-friendly space with 500 children who are in education and in psychosocial support for what they have witnessed. It is also offering them some recreational activities so they can play ball outside and do other activities within the camp. Hunger and malnutrition have reached the highest level on record. Within the DRC, children under 5 are being particularly hit hard. More than 4 million children in the DRC are suffering from acute malnutrition, and over 1.4 million are suffering from severe acute malnutrition, which means that they are an imminent risk of death. 7.3 million children are out of school. 300,000 children die each year before their 5th birthday. So, in this backdrop, Ebola has made this situation even more critical. Since the outbreak was declared 8 months ago, 1,000 people, including 30% are children, have been infected with the disease. More than 600 people have died. Ebola has made it difficult for children to access basic services such as health care and education, and those who are infected or whose relatives are infected are then sometimes stigmatized and excluded from social activities, such as not being allowed in school. UNICEF has so far identified 1,000 children who have been orphaned or left unaccompanied while their parents are isolated in Ebola patient treatment wards. And UNICEF and its many partners are providing psychosocial support and food as well as material assistance. We visited in Bunia one of the creches. A creche is like a kindergarten, in which those who are Ebola survivors are looking after children who have either been orphaned or who are there while their parents are undergoing an Ebola treatment. And if you have had Ebola, you have the antibodies that you cannot pick up Ebola. So these are the survivors who can hold the children, who can talk to them, keep them stimulated during the day. But it's a really important activity with 1,000 of these children orphaned. One key to defeating Ebola will also be engaging and consulting with the communities. So we talked a good deal about the response within the communities, and we were traveling with Asi, the head of the IFRC, and between us we are doing many of the community outreach programs, but it is very important to get information out to the communities so they understand they need clean water, they need soap, that they are not to be touching those who are dying or have died. This is an area that's particularly difficult for women because they are often the caregivers and the ones who are bathing the bodies and bathing children who have Ebola. One area that we talked about was the importance of the government-led response. The government has really stepped up, and they have led the response with the assistance of UNICEF and WHO, and of course the excellent coordination from OCHA and the nonprofit community, which is there and present. The outbreak has been contained to a smaller area, but it is still there, and we need to stop Ebola now. I would also just mention a moment on the funding. The needs in the past year have almost doubled. Last year we said that 8.5 million people needed humanitarian assistance. This year we're saying it's 13 million. The levels of funding are nowhere near sufficient to meet the life-saving requirements in DRC. I know Mark will talk more about this, but in 2019, UNICEF has appealed for $326.1 million to meet urgent humanitarian needs for both children and families in DRC. In the DRC, UNICEF has been a long-standing presence, and so we also do work in nutrition, health, education, water, sanitation, and protection. And the long-term development program and needs are severely underfunded also. So this will be a continuing story. It's one that we hope you will continue to follow. It is important for the world to know that this is a country that is battling hard against a disease, but they're also battling against poverty and conflict. I am also just back from Mozambique, so if you would like to ask any questions about Mozambique, I visited Beira and flew over the now inland lake where we used to have a town, and we met with many of the survivors. Thank you very much, and may I now turn over to Mark Lowcock, my good friend and travel mate.
Henrietta, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you all. I have to say, James, that is a fantastic pair of red socks. I need to know where to get a pair of red socks like that. We'll be in touch on that. So just to add a couple of points to what Henrietta has said. I mean, firstly, the UNICEF element in our appeal is a very important element in our appeal, and we both came away completely convinced of the need to do better for the children of DRC. Our overall appeal for Democratic Republic of Congo this year is for $1.65 billion. It's one of our largest appeals. Now, last year, we raised something more than $700 million, which is a lot more than we've raised in previous years, but was still less than 50% of the total need. Now, of course, in addition to the core humanitarian requirement, there's the funding requirement on Ebola. And one of the reasons we went together with ASC is we don't think the world is paying enough attention to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in particular, right now, there is a moment of opportunity, we think, because there's been the transition. I must say, we had extremely constructive talks with President Tshisekedi. And the first thing he talked to us about was a humanitarian set of issues around displaced people. So, we think the world will be smart to take this moment of opportunity and collaborate in a different way with the government into the future. We were also lucky to be accompanied as we travelled around by the health minister, and we talked to him partly about Ebola, about other issues as well. I just want to add, really, to emphasise one point on Ebola that Henrietta's made, and that's, as we've been saying, and as Dr. Tedros said over the weekend, it will only be if local people are fully involved and consulted that we'll be able to defeat this outbreak. And that means engaging them actively in the response, but it also means doing better to meet the wider needs of local people in the way that local people themselves express their needs. Obviously, insecurity and the activities of armed groups are a real problem, But what we need above all is to listen to local people and to work with local people. And it was encouraging to see as the strategy, the counter-Ebola strategy, continues to evolve, and that the the presentation we got from the government side and from the WHO-led side was all about that focus on engaging local people. I just want to add one thing on Southern African cyclone, which I haven't been to the region, but I've obviously been following it from here, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions for Henrietta. But just to flag to you that we will very, very soon, like in the next couple of hours or so, have online our Mozambique Appeal. So we're appealing for $282 million for the Mozambique response for the next 3 months. Obviously, a big element of that is the health and water and sanitation and hygiene issues that and education that Unicef is so prominent in. A lot of it, though, is also for food security and livelihoods. And as I say, it'll be online in the next couple of hours or so. Very happy to provide further information or to answer your questions on that. We are seeing funding coming through. In addition to the $20 million I released about a week ago from the Central Emergency Response Fund, we are seeing funding coming through from others. I know the UK government, for example, have announced £22 million, and we're seeing money from others. But the funding requirements, the $282 million, which is just for Mozambique, outstrip what's coming forward at the moment. So we will be appealing. We'll be doing more things as the UN over the next couple of days to appeal to the donors to be generous in supporting this appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to add on the cyclone, that tomorrow at about 9:45 a.m. the Secretary General will be at the stakeout to talk about the cyclone and the UN's response. Edie.
Thank you, Ms. Fore. Thank you, Mr. Lowcock. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing, we always welcome you here. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. First, a question on Congo. What happened in Congo that made the needs go up so dramatically to their highest levels, so that last year, you were talking about so many fewer people, and now it's gone up so dramatically? And on the appeal for Mozambique, what's happening with Zimbabwe and Malawi? Are they not going to be getting any money, or are you doing separate appeals for them that we're going to be seeing? And could you tell us, what your overall impression was of how far Mozambique has to go to recover? Thank you.
So shall I have a go and then pass over to you? So on the Congo, I mean, the main thing that happened, Edie, really was really from the end of 2017 through 2018, the combination of the economic stresses on the country and all the politics around the transition contributed to an uptick in violence and displacement. And some of you may remember, I went exactly a year ago at the peak of some of that displacement in Tanganyika province, and also there were all those problems we saw in Ituri province. And the underlying drivers of those things were basically the economic situation with the volatility in commodity prices and the politics around the transition. Now, in some parts of the country, there has been improvement over the last year or so. So, for example, quite a lot of people have gone home in the Kasai's area. But in other parts of the country, the situation hasn't got to the stage where it can improve yet. That was really one of the reasons why we were really quite encouraged by our discussions with the new president because he was very focused on that set of issues. He said to us clearly he would like to work closely with the United Nations in dealing with them. And, you know, Congo is a country where progress is possible. You know, compared when I was first going there 15 years ago, the infant mortality rate is much lower. There's a much larger number of kids in school. Kinshasa is a modern African capital. You know, it's not the case that things never get better in the DRC. That's not true. And it is possible over the period ahead, I think, for significant progress to be made. Absolutely, we will be having appeals for Zimbabwe and Malawi, and they will be out over the next few days. Mozambique is, we think, the worst hit, but there are very real needs in the other two countries as well. So watch this space.
So let me add into Mark's thoughts, and thank you for the questions. When a country has 2 million displaced, it's often the farmers who flee when the conflict comes to their area. And as a result, they're not planting the crops and they're not bringing the grain in. So that's been part of the DRC story as to why there are so many more families that need humanitarian assistance. And part of it is what Mark said about the Kasai region and the Dugu region that we were seeing. When that happens, it just means that things stop. There's also been a drought in some areas. So that makes it extremely difficult. So between the politics, the economics, the displacements and the violence, there are just so many more families in need. And the difficulty for us is that if you're only half funding an appeal last year, which is half the size of this year, then if people just give the same amount, we'll only be 1/4 funded, and the needs are immense. And with Ebola, it's particularly important that we really stop Ebola now. This is not a disease that you want to have moving to any other country. Let me turn to Mozambique. So I would say that right now in Beira, it's a race against time. The search and rescue operations have, I believe, ended today, and the days of mourning in all of these countries. But what is left is people who are displaced. So in a town like Beira, the cyclone hit late at night, and there was a first puff. And so everybody sheltered together, and they were scared. And then it quieted, and so people began to do things normally. Then it came again, and it was strong. That then quieted. Then people came out into the street to see what the problems were and what had happened. And then the cyclone really hit. So there were too many families that were out in the street. The roofs had blown off in the first gusts of wind. The rain was beginning to come. And so people were then terrified. It was dark. Families were separated. And so where they ran was to the schools because there was a roof still on. What it meant is that people are now, first tens of people came, then hundreds, and now thousands that are crowded into these schools. They're lined up for clean water. They need sanitation facilities. They are sleeping there. They left with whatever was on their backs. So people have donated some quilts for warmth. We're doing nutrition. We've set up temporary medical areas. Some doctors were lecturing in town, and they're now helping out at these quickly set up medical centers. We have quite a few orphans. We have calls out to their families. When they don't respond for 2 or 3 days, we have to fear the worst. So it is a very difficult situation for them. There was a second group that was there, and they were the people who were coming in from Buzi Town. Buzi Town is right across the mouth of the river from Beira. And Buzi Town is now underwater. They say it's under 8 meters of water, but you cannot see a person. You cannot see a building. You can only hope that people could swim or walk out. But they were coming because there's no food. It's just an inland sea as far as you can see. So they are coming to Beira, and Beira has been separated. So it's been an island. The airport is now working. Communications are back up. As of this weekend, there is running water, which will be extremely important, but we are very worried about disease because this is the time when cholera begins to be seen, when the mosquitoes go for the stagnant water and the decomposing bodies, and malaria begins, and all sorts of hygiene problems. So we're worried. It's a race against time.
Thank you. James and then Sherwin.
James Bays, Al Jazeera. First on DRC, you talk about a dire situation, underfunded, Ebola, then you talk about a political moment of opportunity. So at the end of your trip, did you come away after this quick snapshot that you both had more optimistic or more pessimistic than you were before about the situation in DRC? And if I could possibly just switch to another part of the world for a question, because since we've been talking, Israeli airstrikes have started in Gaza, where I know you know how bad the humanitarian situation is already. How concerned are you about the people of Gaza right now?
Well, on the first question, if you, I think if you do our jobs, you have no choice but to see how things can get better. So I do think that there is a moment of opportunity, and we need to seize it. And certainly, in terms of creating a set of arrangements where we can collaborate more strongly with the government, I felt more optimistic coming out of the DRC this time than, to be honest with you, than I did a year ago. But the issue is how we seize the opportunity. And really, our number one point is the world will be smart to be generous in supporting the new government of the DRC. And the president, we know, is doing some outreach himself and talking to, key leaders and countries. And we hope he'll get a positive response. Certainly the UN will do everything we can to support the people of the DRC and express our solidarity with them and try to enable the country to move forward. I think on the OPTs, I'm going to leave that to Stefan.
Sherwin?
Thanks, Steph. Sherwin Briceby, South African Broadcasting. I wonder what some of the longer-term takeaways are from this disaster in Southern Africa. What should we be learning from this? These are very poor countries. Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world. When a cyclone of this nature comes through a place like that, it destroys basically everything. I mean, you talk about roofs flying off homes within the first bout of this cyclone. What are the lessons we are to learn from this? Will this region require some sort of Marshall Plan long-term beyond the 282 million you're asking for now for the next 3 months? What's the long-term need here for a place like that?
Well, shall I just say a little word on that, and then Henrietta will I'm sure want to add. I was in Malawi and Zimbabwe about 3 weeks ago. In Zimbabwe, we launched our appeal for $234 million to help them cope with the erratic rains and the economic crisis. And then in Malawi, basically, we've been supporting them through the period of lower harvest last year towards what everybody thought would be quite a good harvest this year. And of course, now the cyclone throws all that into doubt again, because I'm afraid, well, in Mozambique, for example, we know that 500,000 hectares of agricultural land has been damaged, and that is going to have an effect on the harvest, there's no question. And the same issue we're having to get to grips with in Malawi as well. And I talked about exactly the issue you've raised with President Mutharika, and the conversation we had was, given what is observably growing frequency of these major weather events, both droughts and storms, how is Malawi and countries like it going to evolve the economy to be able to cope better with these kinds of problems? Malawi is very reliant on subsistence farmers planting maize. Maize requires 90 days of reasonably regular rain, and the number of years in which that is happening seems to be falling. So, the obvious takeaway is, how is Malawi going to diversify its economy to be a bit less reliant on rain-fed agriculture. There's a lot of irrigation potential in Malawi, but also to maybe diversify planting choices. And I did, in Salima on Lake Malawi, talk to farmers who were saying, well, these days we're planting more cassava, other root crops, and there's a conversation going on about, well, would some of the smaller grains, the millets and sorghums, be appropriate? Ultimately, each household makes its own decision about what it wants to plant in a year, but diversifying the economy is going to have to be part of the strategy, even within agriculture. Agriculture will be a big part of the economy in Malawi, I think, for a long time. Within that, you can diversify, but then you have to diversify beyond agriculture as well.
I'll just add in a couple of thoughts. The governments have really begun to step up, but they don't have enough capacity. So in the region, there are other governments, like South Africa, who are really coming into the fore. And then other countries are sending help with planes and helicopters. But in times like this, you need boats, you need helicopters, you need the ability to rebuild a bridge in 24 hours. And sometimes it is military that would do that. So they need infrastructure help, and they're getting it from governments. Your point, though, is a really interesting one. The future will have to be public and private, which is what was the basis of the Marshall Plan. And so, to Mark's point, as you're rethinking the economy, we have to try to make sure that these are knitted together in each country as best we can and encourage it. We also found, though, that many villages do not have clean water, and that's when cholera begins. It's when disease is spread because you cannot get soap and disinfectant there. So if, as we are building back and thinking about development, we can actually think about some of the things that you need to keep this from starting again, it would be helpful. And then lastly, this is the time when many countries are thinking about their budgets, and the World Bank spring meetings are coming up. So to make sure that countries have the ability to put a good amount into social services, into education, and to health, that will be part of their resilience as countries.
Thank you very much. Thank you to both of you for coming. We'll start the briefing in just a few minutes.